Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. The webinar will begin momentarily. Hello, and welcome to today's online event presented by the National Newcomer Navigation Network, which is funded by Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada and is hosted by the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. N4 recognizes and values the continued connections and our ongoing relationships with our Indigenous peoples in Canada, the traditional stewards of this great land, which has become the home to a diverse population of other peoples. CHIU and N4 are housed on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation, and for that, we are thankful. My name is Natalie Graham, and I'm the Learning Specialist for the N4 Network, and I'll be hosting today's event. I am pleased to introduce you to our speakers for today's N4 webinar entitled Navigating Online Communications, Essential Tips for Healthcare and Settlement Service Providers. Jan Bailey and Shona Welsh of OVATION Experts in Speaker Training have traveled the world teaching people how to be clear, confident, and compelling speakers. With over 60 years of combined experience in broadcasting, acting, speech contests, corporate leadership, and stand-up comedy, Jan and Shona have designed and delivered thousands of workshops on speaking and communication skills. Using a uniquely creative and interactive style, OVATION programs transform people's speaking skills and their self-image. They focus on laughter, not lecture, stage time, not screen time, practice, not preaching, and theater, not theory. You can see Jan and Shona in action at ovationspeakertraining.com. Today's session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our N4 website within 24 to 48 hours following today's presentation. Should there be any technical issues during this webinar, all attendees will be informed with details on an alternate session. Before we begin today's event, I would like to introduce you to our platform features to help enhance your participation experience. Throughout today's session, we invite you to enter your questions into the Q&A window. These questions will be answered in the question and answer session following the presentation, and we'll be monitoring these questions throughout the session. You can view the questions being asked and click on the thumbs up button to upvote the question. You can also use a comment feature to make a comment or add to a question being asked. My co-host Mariah may answer some questions during the session, while others will be saved for the live question and answer session. Now, without further delay, I would like to present to you Jan Bailey and Shona Welsh.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and big welcome to everybody out there. Again, here's the title, Navigating Online Communications, and we're hoping to give you some really concrete tips today on video conferencing. So you just heard the big introduction, so let's jump right into it. By the way, there's going to be a handout that Natalie's got to send to all of you, so it's going to have everything in it that we talk about today. We'll probably add a few things here and there. So you're definitely going to get this, what we talk about today, and more in the handout. So don't worry about writing things down, but you're perfectly free to do it if you want. Now, we're going to give you some concrete strategies, but hopefully there's a little bit of laughter as well in this strange video conferencing world we are living in. What we'd like to do before we jump into tips and tricks is talk to you a little bit about what are the challenges of video conferencing and how does it impact you in your practice dealing with newcomer clients. So Jan's going to start us off with our first slide in terms of the challenges of online communications. Jan.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much. We're very happy to be here. I'm not sure if there are any tips or tricks that I can tell you that you probably all haven't already encountered. I am sure that in the last, 6 or 8 months of you being online and trying to adapt your world to that, you've come across all kinds of crazy things that have happened. It just kind of is where we're at, isn't it? But we certainly are going to go through a few things. We're going to talk a little bit in the next few slides about Zoom fatigue, which I suspect some of you are feeling. It might be Zoom, it might be Microsoft Teams, it might be Google, whatever you're using. I suspect there is a little bit of fatigue. We'll talk about that. We're going to talk a little bit about how that requires more focus and that you are in fact experiencing something that is happening directly to you. We'll talk a little bit about quite a few things in more detail, a little bit about the difference between being an introvert and an extrovert and how that does impact you. Shona will talk to you about that. And then how our personal life has merged with our professional life. And I think that all of you are finding that as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that in detail as we go through the next few slides. So we'll toss it over to Shona and she can start. I believe we're going to talk about next slide. Don't you hate it when you have to ask for the next slide?
Yeah, actually, I think you were going to talk about a little bit about why it requires more focus. But
well, it does require more focus simply because you are sitting in front of a camera. You're being observed. You feel like you're being observed the whole time. You feel like someone is watching you even if they're not. And it's a completely different medium for you. So there is no and there's no break from that. I can't really right in this moment as I'm sitting here having this meeting get up and go wander across to the cubicle next to me and talk to someone. And that really does require that whole narrowing of your world as you're speaking and as you're meeting with other folks. So it really takes a whole lot more than we are accustomed to. Now, if you add having to focus on English is not even your first language, that adds a whole other dimension. Shona and I have done a fair bit of work, as Natalie mentioned, in countries around the world, particularly the Middle East. And so we're accustomed to dealing with people and working with people who English is not their first language. And it really requires a switch for both parties. So we have to engage in a different way, use language in a different way, and as do they. Well, now imagine feeling that Zoom fatigue and having to focus on a different language. It really puts it into perspective. And I know I realized, and Shona will probably agree with me, I realized how many idioms I use and how many pop culture references I use and how many English language that, if it's not your first language, you probably wouldn't recognize what we're talking about. So it's really interesting to be aware of your language in a different way. And all of those things require that you focus more, as does the listener or the person that you're presenting to. So it's a series of challenges.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with regard to video conferencing, why does it, on top of all of that, require more focus, is because we don't get the same body language cues that we do when we're in person. And we pick up a lot of those subconsciously, that actually, as you've probably seen the research, that most of the message comes from the unspoken stuff. So why that focus has to be more attuned is we're just searching for those cues that we're not getting. And that is kind of a common theme that runs through some of our challenges. Let's move on to the next one. Particularly when it comes to new Canadians, lack of eye contact can lead to faulty conclusions about the speaker. So you, as the person that's assisting them or counseling them, etc., their impressions of you actually come across differently on a video conferencing. As Jan said, it's already difficult conveying understanding and meaning when you're crossing cultures. But what happens, and what some of the most recent research shows, is that not only is it harder, you have to focus more, but our communications can feel more inconsistent, they can feel inaccurate, and it actually alters people's judgment of us. Let's talk about why. These psychological studies that have taken place over the last 6 months tell us this, that the lack of eye contact and the very few body language cues that we have actually lead us to make a more negative conclusion about the people that are speaking. Now, of interest, this research comes from a lot of immigration hearings that have been taking place via video conference over the last few months. And a lot of the judges or the immigration panels are having a more negative impression of the person that's speaking, the potential immigrant or refugee, etc. Now that has implications not only for potential immigrants and refugees, but it has implications for you as a speaker. And in one of the studies, what they showed was a video to two separate groups, same video of a woman speaking about whatever topic. And the first group got to see not only her face, but from the waist up, and able to see body language and how she was using her hands and things like that. And the second group was only shown her face. Exact same speech, exact same person, the same video, just face. And what happened was the group that could see both her face and her body language said that they felt this woman was cheerful and friendly. But the ones that could only see her face, the same person, the second group said, well, I think she's coming across kind of tense, maybe a little agitated. It was the same thing. So it shows you the challenge we have over video conference. And that's why we're going to give you some tips today that helps you bring your body language in and talk about eye contact in more detail. Let's move on to the next challenge.
I just want to add to that too, Shona, that imagine if you add to that whole research and that whole study, and then just add the fact that most of us are actually quite uncomfortable looking at the camera. And that's one of the things we'll talk about. But so now I'm trying to deliver a talk, or I'm trying to connect with someone, and I am uncomfortable looking at the camera. So people are certainly getting that feeling. It really is true. One of the things that I briefly touched on in the introduction is that we are aware of being watched when we are using any online communication. And I was laughing to myself because I was thinking about my poor teenage son, and I was thinking, this must be how he feels all the time. He's an only child, and he has these two parents that are always hovering above him, waiting for him to do something wrong, right? And it's kind of that feeling. It's like you're always on. No, really, we're very kind to our son, honest we are. But it really is, you feel like you're always on display. And that's a very stressful feeling, because I know that I feel different when someone tells me that the Zoom or the webinar or the whatever we're doing is going to be recorded, or when it's live. There's something about your brain that says, oh, it's live. If I mess up or if I go off track, it'll just kind of go away. But oh, it's being recorded and people are going to watch it afterward. I really need to be careful. And that sense of having to be careful and be aware all the time really is disconcerting for most of us.
Right. And that leads into the next point about introverts and extroverts. Now, it's equally exhausting for introverts and extroverts. And Jan and I feel like we can speak with some authority on this, because we are both kind of 50-50, introvert and extrovert. But some of you are going to be obviously more introverted and some more extroverted. Let's talk about both of those. So for the extroverts on the call, and Jen and I can relate to this, it's killing you to not have interaction with people and get that energy from the room, because extroverts get energy from those around them. And we've spent like 7 months now doing webinars and workshops online, and we're so missing the energy of that room. So extroverts are really having a tough time with exhaustion from that perspective. We're getting a little jittery about wanting to interact with people. So that's kind of the biggest source of exhaustion and Zoom fatigue that extroverts are experiencing. On the other hand, everybody was making an assumption, we found at the beginning, oh, introverts are gonna love this video conferencing because they get to sit and they can think about things and they don't have to show up. A little bit. For about the first week, the introverted part of me is like, oh, this is cool. You know, I don't have to worry about being on, except for you do. You do end up feeling on. And of course, this is a stressor for introverts, and the introvert in us sometimes feels that stress to be on. And one of the things we've said to people is, can you let introverts just turn off their camera once in a while so they feel like they can just withdraw a little bit from that sense of being watched all the time and that sort of performative aspect of being on a screen. So introverts are just as exhausted as extroverts for definitely different reasons, but we're definitely feeling the exhaustion after 6 or 7 months. We got one more background thought before we jump into specific and concrete tips and tricks for you. Jan.
We, as you all know, the brain is really interesting. It's actually fascinating. And one of the things that's really cool is that I know this has happened to all of you. You know, when you're in the kitchen and you walk out of the kitchen because you've thought, I should go get that thing. And you walk out of the kitchen, Shona's looking at me thinking, where is she going with this? And you walk out of the kitchen and you go through a doorway and you get into the living room and you stop and you think, why am I here? Well, the reason that happens is there is a feature in the brain. I'm not sure if feature is the right word, but there is a thing that happens in the brain that resets when you walk through a physical doorway. So isn't that interesting when you think about what's happening with us now? We don't ever walk out of the door. We are now in our home for our work. We're in our home for harassing our teenagers. We're in our home for being with our partners, and we're in our home to entertain in any fashion when we have our own little bubbles. So there really are no doorways to reset. So we're really feeling like, oh my goodness, my life is just kind of one, well, I don't know, one big long work day, I think. So that really is something that's legitimate for everyone. So I guess what it comes down to is cut yourself a little bit of slack and make sure that you walk out of the door every now and again and say, I am no longer at work. I am done. And it really is important to take that, to create those breaks for yourself. However you want to build that into your day, be sure that you do that.
Yeah, it's a little weird to have a meeting, then meet your mother-in-law, then have a,
it's just
weird.
Odd.
Yeah, great. All right, so that's a little bit of the background on why we are experiencing this thing called Zoom fatigue. We're going to jump right into some tips and tricks right now. We've developed a 3-point method, our little formula we call the SPA method, because, I think it evokes those wonderful days where we get to actually go to a spa. The first S in SPA is we're going to talk about some ways for you to set the stage. So thinking about lighting and camera and things, a few other points. And again, other things we won't talk about that will be on your handout. The second, the P in our stage, our SPA method, is how do you prepare to present? So tips to help you get prepared before you go on camera, and also ideas for making your presentations more engaging. And then finally, the third part of our formula, the I, which is activate your skills. And we'll go over some tips and tricks again on your presenting skills and how you're coming across. So with that, what we're going to do now is I am going to stop sharing the screen and you get to look at Jan and I, because our first tip kind of in the background is, can you shake up your presentation? It doesn't all have to be PowerPoint, and you keep people's interest, and you'll see why that's important in a few minutes. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen while I turn it over to Jan.
Hello, you're so much larger now. This is very exciting. So one of the things that is very interesting that we have all noticed and that is a challenge for many people when they're doing online presenting is lighting. Now, what I will say to you is that natural lighting, though you would think it would be your friend, is not. There is no film set that you will find, there is no television set that there is ever natural lighting on unless they happen to be outside. They just cover over all those windows and they bring in the artificial light so that it can be controlled. So I would say to you, whenever possible, and I know this sounds crazy, go into a dark room and turn on the lights if you really want to be aware of how you look and really want to look even, because we've all seen those crazy shots. I have to tell a story. I was on a webinar the other night. It was a meeting. So none of us were really participating, but there was one lady who was on, and I hit mute and I said to my husband, I think she's doing a seance, because she had these, it was all dark in her room, and there were these 2 wall sconces. I think you can see my hands. There was 2 wall sconces, and they had this orange red light. that was going up and going down, and she had this bizarre red halo around her, and I thought, can she not see herself in the camera? But so it really is interesting what happens with lighting. So all that to say, Shona is going to be the guinea pig, and she looks quite lovely now as you all look at her. She looks very well lit, very bright, and very evenly lit, okay? I am not so much. I'm in fluorescent lighting here. I do have my fabulous ring light in front of me, which I love, but it isn't quite strong enough to brighten my whole face. So Shona, I will get her to demonstrate. If you would just sort of lean over there and open your natural light blind, that would be very helpful. And you can show, so here's what happens when you kind of blast out the light, okay? Now, as she sits forward, you can see that the lighting is still pretty good. Back, you know what? You still look pretty good. This is a very bad demonstration.
Well, let's take this light out of the way. I've got a light shining in front of me to light me up, but if I move it aside.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
See what happens when you've got natural light coming from the side.
So now all of a sudden we've got some uneven lighting. And I'm not suggesting that we all are trying to be supermodels on the camera. I'm really not suggesting that, but I am saying that it really, when you're distracted enough by your own appearance on the camera, because we're not accustomed to walking around with a mirror in front of us all day seeing ourselves. So when you're distracted by that already, if you look a little bit blue, or if you look a little bit unbalanced, or if you've got big dark shadows under your nose, it is a bit distracting. So Shona's back, she's closed her blind, and she's nice and well lit and brightly lit. Now, it does take some getting used to. I'm sure, Shona, you feel like you're being blasted by the
Absolutely, and it's very hot.
Oh.
I feel like it's an interrogation.
Okay, she got the work light. She got the work light in front of her. So I do highly recommend for $20 or 20, however many dollars that you buy one of those ring lights. They really are great to even out the lighting. What's interesting, I laughed when I was thinking about lighting, is that in days of old, to make sure that actors and starlets in particular looked great on camera, well, they would put Vaseline over the camera lens, right, to soften the lighting. So here we are telling you about lighting. So maybe just smear a little Vaseline on that, and it'll make us all look better. So anyway, that's lighting. That's a lighting tip. The other thing that I would say on a practical note is walk around in your room. Use your cell phone and walk around in your room and figure out where the lighting is best for you. It's easy, takes you 2 minutes, and set your computer up accordingly. It really does make a difference.
The other thing just to add to, so we were talking about side light for me, but if you have a window behind you, you will often be backlit, and then your whole face will be dark as well.
Way too dark.
So if at all possible, try to have a light in front of you if you've got a window to the side, or just stay away, as Jan said, altogether. Other than this light in front of me, my light, I have no other lights on in my office here. So it just gives you an idea about that. So that leads us into the next point, which is in terms of setting the stage and the spot formula, which is about your camera and where you should be sitting and where it should be situated. So right now you see me looking at the camera, but it's actually not directly in line with my eyes. It's just a little bit above. So it's a really nice angle. It's just slightly raised. You get a full view of the face. You don't get to see any of those lovely little double chins that are developing. You've probably been on a lot of Zoom meetings where you're, looking up people's noses or they're hunched over. You want to have that camera angle just slightly above your eyes and about 3 feet, 1 meter away from you. So right now that's exactly where I am, about 1 meter away from the camera. And I've been adjusting my chair up and down depending on the angle. I'm trying to fill this middle part of the screen as much as possible. So there's blank here and blank here, but I'm taken up, I'm framed by the whole screen. So about 1 meter away and just a little bit above eye level. Now I want to talk to you about something really important here, because remember we were talking at the beginning about people can judge you more negatively when there's no eye contact. Well, this is our big challenge, right? When we teach people how to do public speaking in person, we talk about eye contact and look at your audience. Well, we have to give you the opposite advice here. You've got to view your camera as a person. So I am looking straight at the camera, which makes you on the other side feel like I'm looking at you. I'm not. So I'm going to demonstrate. Right now I'm looking at Jan. I'm looking directly at Jan's face, but to you, I look like I'm focused on something else. So it's a really tough skill to remind yourself of, because when I'm looking in the camera, I'm missing some of the body language. Like I can see that Jan's nodding with my peripheral vision, but you're again missing some of that body language. So you don't, when you're in person, you're not staring at someone and never blinking or looking away, right? So you can look away from time to time, maybe say something to your client, looking in the camera, and then just glance down and see some of the body language that's going on so you can check perception. But this is probably the hardest thing to change, but probably one of the most powerful things you can do to connect with your audience. So remember, the camera is a person. You should, wherever possible, be talking into the camera. Now we have some other tips about sound and what colors to wear and things like that that will be in the handout, because we want to spend some times on other practical things. But definitely we've got some information on there. So that takes us into the P part of the SPA formula, which is preparing. Oh, Jan has something to add before we move on. I wasn't looking at her.
It just popped into my head as we're talking about body language and trying to be approachable. The other thing that's interesting to me is that if your shot is wider, so I'm just going to tip my camera down so that I can move back. And if all of a sudden, if I'm sitting back here and there we go, I'll talk to you from back here, I look a little bit more relaxed, don't I? All of a sudden, it's kind of you and I, and we're having a conversation in my lovely living room, which is not my living room. And it just automatically becomes more warm and more personal. If you look at Shona, where she's at, she looks more, I'll just scooch forward.
I moved back, yeah.
Okay. So all of a sudden, it's a different feeling. So be aware of what environment and the size of you, that sounds really strange, the framing of the shot makes you feel warmer, more relaxed, or does it make you feel more intense and more looming, right? You almost have to think like a film director and think, what is the image that I'm portraying on camera? So I just want to add to that. I actually like that. I like it when people sit back. It just feels more friendly. Just feels more friendly. Anyway, sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's fine. And then a little later, we'll talk about why it's important to have that wide shot for body language. Because remember, it's the lack of facial expression and body language that's giving people a more negative impression of you, and we don't want that.
Oh.
All right, so we are going to move into the P part of the SPA formula, preparing to present, and Jen's going to talk a little bit about some tips around that with regard to your notes and how to handle those.
Yes. I will assume for the purposes of this discussion that you are all very good at your job, and I have absolute faith in that. But when you add the camera and Zoom and oh my God, another Zoom meeting into that kind of feeling, it does sometimes feel overwhelming. So the first thing that we would say to you is Zoom, and when I say Zoom, I mean Microsoft Teams and all of those other kinds of things as well. Sorry, Microsoft. But is Zoom the right tool for you? Does this meeting really require a video chat? Does this meeting really require a face-to-face kind of meeting? Or is this just a old-fashioned, hey, we can take 10 minutes on an audio call? It sounds so strange to have to differentiate the two, but can we just talk on the phone for a few minutes? Can I email you a form that you have to fill out? Can I, right, is there another method of communicating that would just give us a little break from Zoom? So really do think about that first before you head into the meeting. Then, if you decide that yes, in fact, we do need to meet on camera, but it's going to be a complicated meeting or presentation, I'm going to have lots of notes. Well, we are fans of these lovely little note cards that Shona, sticky notes. I think I'm going to be converted to sticky notes. But we write our slides or our notes or our presentation on these little notes. And then I take a little clip, an alligator clip, and I stick it right up here in front of the camera, right up here, yeah, and it's totally great. So not only can I see you in the camera, but I can see my sticky note or my note card in front. So I just write a few key points that I want to remember. There they are, and then that eye contact piece is fully intact, because if I am looking at my notes, which are now down over here, how are you feeling as I do this? Are you feeling like you're included in this conversation? Are you feeling like you are part of my, yeah, no, you're not. Okay, so it's really important that that's a great tip. That's all I have to say about that. It's a great tip. Use that one. Don't look off here. Try and focus on the person that you're speaking to.
So whatever works for you, sticky notes, or I take the index card and then I tape them individually and I flip them. You
Which
know,
is
and
a
it's
great
not,
idea, which I'm going to try next time because I got alligator clips all over my my screen. It's a disaster here, let me tell you.
yeah, I mean, the thing is, if they're right next to your camera, you're only glancing over for a second and people barely even notice it versus, as Jan demonstrated, looking down. That leads into the next tip, which is don't be afraid to shake it up. Like back to Jan's thought about video conference, does it really need to be a video conference? It is so stunning to us how quickly humans get into habits. So all of a sudden, as of March, it was like, oh, we have to have a video conference. And Jan and I have taken to saying to clients, really? Do we? Can we just have a phone call? And it's just a relief for everybody. On that same note, what happens a lot of times when we're having meetings, it is the usual and predictable death by PowerPoint. Now, one way to shake it up is exactly what we've done today. So we started out with the PowerPoint. I'm betting some of you are thinking, oh, it's going to be the typical PowerPoint, blah, blah, blah. Nope. Because we want to shake it up a little bit. You can do that too. You can have a little bit of PowerPoint and then you can stop screen sharing and then do some of the back and forth that we're talking about. And you can do all kinds of things to shake it up. And let's talk about what those are. And in order to set this up for you, I need to tell you about a study that Microsoft did back in 2013 having to do with goldfish. Please bear with me, there is a point to this story. So back in 2013, for some reason, Microsoft wanted to know what the average attention span of a goldfish was. You can Google it, I swear to God, this is not fake news. And yes, they did put little electrodes on the side of the goldfish's little head.
Did you see it? Is there a photo? Is there a photo?
No, I couldn't find a photo. I looked, but I didn't do it. Anyway, so they determined that goldfish can pay attention for 9 seconds. Why should you care about this? Because in the last 25 years, human beings' ability to pay attention has gotten really, really short to the point that our average attention span is 8 seconds. Yes, indeed, we are worse than a goldfish. Now, if you really want to scare yourself, you can read an amazing book called The Shallows by Nicholas Carr, C-A-R-R, I can spell. And he just talks about what the internet has done to our brain and that constant need for that dopamine rush, you know, every 8 seconds. So what happens is when you're sitting through like a 1-hour Zoom webinar or a meeting, people are zoning in and out with their attention. So you got to mix it up. Change from a PowerPoint to having somebody on the screen. Change back. Or you can do stuff like this to make a point. It's low tech, but it works. Now you will always and forever remember the goldfish, which I had a lot of fun coloring, by the way. And just a reminder, understanding that when people's attention spans are on average about 8 seconds, you got to keep mixing it up. Now, again, I mentioned low tech can be good. You've seen this a lot on YouTube, right? Shake it up a little bit, write something on a card. Ask the audience, I don't know if you can see that in the light, ask the audience to do something active. You know, you can actually shamelessly steal all the stuff we're telling you today, do it with your staff, get them to act it out. You can get them to stand up, they can get them to stretch. It just shakes it up a little bit. And low tech really does change the pace, right? It's just a really, remember the days when we used to get handwritten thank you notes? Has anybody ever gotten a handwritten thank you note? I can't even remember in the last 20 years when I have, but last week I got a handwritten thank you note from a friend and it just felt so much more meaningful. Anyway, the point is it takes more time to do something low tech, but it actually can have some impact. So just think about all the ways you can shake it up, change speakers. Like one of the reasons you're hopefully not going to get bored is I'm not talking for an hour. Jan's not talking for an hour. We're back and forth all the time. That shakes up your attention. Yeah.
I just want to add to that. I laughed when Shona said, we've all experienced death by, or we're slowly maybe experiencing death by PowerPoint, because the College of London, University College of London did a study, because we're on the topic of studies here. No goldfish were harmed in this particular study, but it was actually a study of civil servants. And they studied 7,500 civil servants for 20 years. And they found that those civil servants who reported being quite bored at work did in fact, or were in fact, twice as likely to die of heart attacks. So it really is true. Death by boredom really is a thing. So you gotta shake it up for people.
Oh, thanks for that lovely piece of good news.
Well, you know, you gotta find some excitement in your life.
Okay, boredom equals early death. Okay, let's go have some fun. All right, that moves us into the A part of the SPA formula, which is activate all the great skills you already have, and Jen's going to lead us off with that.
I always think that it's fascinating that Shona mentioned it earlier. We're creatures of habit, and we get into patterns and we get into ruts, and we think this is the way we do things, and or we forget how we used to do things. You know, how did I behave in meetings before? Because now they're online. What did I do then? Well, please try and remember what you did do in meetings in the past, because if you wouldn't do it live and in person, don't do it online. So that means if you wouldn't eat your sandwich at a boardroom table, then please don't make us watch you eating your lunch at an online event. And I mean, I think it's great to have a glass of water. Sometimes you've got to have that, or maybe it's a morning meeting and you're having a coffee. That's great. But if you wouldn't do it in real life, that sounded funny. If you wouldn't do it live, then please don't do it online. Thank you very much. Unless, of course, Natalie has scheduled for you a lunch and learn. Now you can eat your lunch. But other than that, and mute yourself. Oh, please, I don't want to hear you chewing. Come on, right? And we've all seen the crazy things, and I don't need to tell you about some of the crazy things we've seen on YouTube with some of the recording of what's gone on in behind the scenes. But we are tolerant of those things to a certain extent, but it is still a professional environment. So please, please, please be aware of that. That is really important. Now, one of the things that's a challenge with Zoom in particular is, and you'll see Shona and I have done a little bit of it, we naturally step on each other, right? We naturally want to jump in and say something. We naturally want to add something. And it can be a bit of a problem as this little yellow box kind of jumps back and forth between the speakers. So before you go into a meeting, or your chair maybe sets the tone or the rules for the meeting and says, here's how we're going to do this. So we're not doing that. Oh, sorry, no, sorry, you go, you. We've all done that. There are a couple of things that we like to do. Maybe your chair sets up the round robin, and whoever speaks, and when they're finished, they say, Shona. So now she knows that it's her turn, okay? And we set that tone at the beginning of the meeting. Again, I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know, but many of us aren't using it because we fall back into old habits. I was at a meeting the other day, and instead of using the hand up on the technology, we all just did this. And I mean, we're back to low tech, right? But hey, I've got something to say. And I mean, we all looked a bit silly in the video, but whatever, it worked. It was really great. So do set the rules, and set them with your clients off the top too, right? Please feel free to interrupt me, but if you just want to put your hand up, or do the kind of the look on your face, right, that says, I've got something to say. So set that tone with your clients in advance. You've got all these skills. You just need to kind of tweak them a little bit for the on-camera environment.
I'd like to add a couple of things.
Sorry, Shona?
Actually, yeah, it was my turn next, but I actually wanted to add a couple of things. First of all, one of the things I learned, I've been working from home for a long, long time. So this is really not new for me, and Jan has been doing it for the last few years too. And one of the things I learned really early on, and to the point of being professional, if you wouldn't do it at home or in a real meeting, don't do it online. And by the way, folks, that includes wearing your pajama bottoms. And the reason I say that is very much like Jan's example of walking into another room, right? So you're shifting your perspective. I discovered early on that if I dressed like I normally would, like professionally for a meeting, and I got out of my pajamas, it actually set my brain up for feeling professional. So give it a whirl. I mean, for some of you, maybe it doesn't, but for me, I find it really, really works is if I'm, having a business meeting as opposed to just a chat with my girlfriend. I'm out of my pajamas and I'm wearing what I would wear if I were standing in front of you. So, I think that's another a good tip. Another thing that occurs to me as Jan was talking is a lot of times we will ask a question, we're not stepping on each other, but we're waiting for people to answer. And we feel the need to jump in and feel that, fill that space. So one of the things we've learned over the years is ask the question on the video conference, and especially I know working with new Canadians, sometimes they're translating it in their head, or they want time to think. Count to 10, obviously inside your head, not outside. And when you get to about 8, we can almost guarantee you that the other people on the line are not going to be comfortable with the silence. They're going to start talking. And when you think about the work that you're in, you're really trying to get information and feelings and reactions from your clients. So you want to give them that space to actually tell you. So it takes a little longer. There's often a delay on video conferencing. So again, count to 10 in your head. Now, some people will probably be thinking right now, okay, but what if I count to 10 and they still don't say anything? This is the only thing, I learned this in my coaching training. This is the only thing you ever say when you get to 10, and it's this. Would you like me to repeat the question? Because again, in your jobs, serving newcomers in the healthcare sector, you want to make sure you got a real sense of what's going on for them. And you want what's in their head coming out of their mouth, not what's in your head coming out of their mouth. And it's trickier to manage online. So count to 10, and I think you'll find that really useful. Yeah. So the next thing we want to talk about in terms of how we are activating our skills is, we talked earlier at the very beginning about that eye contact and body language, and we don't have the advantage of being able to read it as much. And as Jan demonstrated, sitting back a little bit, you can actually see me almost from the waist up, and I've got the opportunity to talk a little bit and do some things, and you can read that a little better. So that's one thing you can do. But another thing to do is thinking about your voice and how you're projecting it. Now, normally if you were doing a presentation, we'd have you stand up. We'd talk to you about posture and breathing. A lot of us are sitting down. So right now, as you sit in your chair, I'd like you to think very, very purposefully about how you're sitting. You will want to have both of your feet comfortably flat on the floor, so you feel very solid. It's ideal if you've got a chair that's got 2 arms, and you can put your arms, rest them there, and make sure you're sitting up straight, because that's going to make sure you're breathing deeply, and you can therefore project your voice. Because a lot of times what happens when we're on video conference, we don't project our voice as well. Now, I'm not talking in my normal voice right now. I'm not talking as if Jan was in the room with me and we're having a conversation. I am projecting my voice to the furthest place in the room. We always tell people in person, speak to the furthest person in the room. Well, again, I'm imagining the camera's a person and you're far away from me. I'm projecting my voice. It doesn't sound like I'm yelling. Another trick is that we often swallow our words on video conferencing. So make sure, just like we do with people whose first language is not English, we enunciate better, we slow down our speaking rate, and we often do trail off at the end of sentences. Just making sure you're enunciating words really clearly and you're keeping that volume up through the end of a sentence. Here's a few tips on how to keep the volume up. First of all, if you're on a phone call, not on a video conference, stand up. It actually helps you breathe better. It puts more energy into your voice. You can project. And the secret here is volume equals energy. So the more you can actually sound enthusiastic in your voice, you see how my body's starting to move as I started to be a little more enthusiastic. So standing can help you do that. Try smiling through, I'm not going to smile through a whole video conference, but when you've got a phone call, stand up. See the difference it makes in your voice when you smile, when you talk it through. Jen and I are coaching some very, very important financial executives right now. And these guys have got it in their head. They've got to be serious all the time. We're making them do their entire speech with a smile on their face. Not because we want them to do that in real life, but just because it helps them realize they don't look like they're passionate about what they're talking about. So the quick lesson is volume equals energy. Before we take your questions and answers, we've got one more thing, and I'm going to have to go back to screen sharing because Jan's going to take us through the impact you can actually have with visuals online. So just let me get that set up, Jan.
I just wanted to add that my internet apparently is unstable, so hopefully you can hear me. What I wanted to add is that I know you can't see me, but when Shona talked about about energy. I never ever actually sit back in my chair. I always perch when I'm worried about energy. I perch on the edge of my chair, and it forces me to lift and to sit up and hold myself. So I really use that as a trick to keep my energy up when I'm, especially if I'm coaching or I'm chairing a meeting or I'm the person who's kind of on. So just another little tip.
Okay, ready to go.
Excuse me, sorry. A final thought on visuals. We have told you a little bit about death by PowerPoint. We've told you a little bit about taking it to old school, doing some different techniques. We actually would like to show you what that looks like, because what we would really like to encourage you to do is to create presentations, whatever those presentations are in your work. We would like you to try and create very visual presentations, because all kinds of things are at play here. 50% of the brain's resources are used analyzing visuals. We are a very visual society, a very visual species. So we analyze pictures and we capture information from pictures really very quickly, much more quickly than we do if there's a list of text or a bunch of things that we're expected to read. So we would like to encourage you to use high impact visuals, whether it's a Sharpie marker colored goldfish, or whether it's a very intricate visual. We'd like to encourage you to use those. So we're going to, advertisers have known this forever. An advertiser knows that a picture creates a feeling, and it is the feeling that people remember. It's the feeling that people connect with. So try and think a little bit in pictures as you create your PowerPoint or as you create your presentations, and think about, how could I get people on board in the way I want them to be on board emotionally? So think about that. So we'll take a look at some pictures here that I'm actually not going to say anything when we look at them. I'd like to just kind of see how you feel about them. There, how's that for a easy way out on a presentation? We're just going to look at the pictures.
Sounds like a plan.
So the first one is, how does that make you feel? An unbelievably impactful photograph. And really nothing else needs to be said, okay? If you're inclined, you can read the text. This one, it's okay, sorry. This one is, next one is Mad Canada. Wow. Anybody get chills when they look at that? Now, I know these are dramatic photos and they are maybe serious connotations. Certainly they can go the other direction, be very fun and funny, but these, there's not much that needs to be said. The ad campaign is extremely successful with these photographs. This next one is one of my favorites, and you might have to lean in a little bit to read the fine print at the bottom, but it says, "We won't sell Kinder Egg chocolates in the interest of child safety. Why are we selling assault weapons?" Okay, one of these things was banned in the US. Wow, okay, I feel that one, the chills running up my leg. You don't need to say much at all, because or what a great way to spark a discussion. The picture is there and all of a sudden the emotion comes in as well, and you can begin your discussion from there. Well, she is delightful at 42. She's got a bit of a smoking problem, but yeah, this one is obviously smoking causes premature aging. Okay, and it's one of those things that makes you laugh and then you go, oh, right, when you realize what the picture is actually saying. So again, something that advertisers and marketers have known forever, and we're asking you, think about it. Maybe you can implement a few high impact visuals into your presentation, even if it's only one or two pictures that are kind of sprinkled in throughout your presentation. What a great way to give people a break, especially people whose language is, maybe their first language is not English. What a great way to give them a little break.
Great. All right, well, that wraps it up for us. We hope you found some useful tips and tricks, and we invite you to write to us directly if there are some questions that we're not able to get to in the Q&A session that's coming right up. So with that, I'll turn it over to Natalie.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jen and Shona. That was a wonderful presentation. Some of the topics certainly resonated with me, especially getting up and not knowing what you we're moving into the room to get. In my case, it's getting up from my chair. I just remember. But anyway, so we do have a couple questions here. So someone would like to know, do you have tips for setting up a session with a newcomer client who may not be familiar with their software to promote communication?
Well, one of the things, I'll just jump in. One of the things I've been working with a lot of new Canadians lately in teaching them some basic business skills. And one of the things I found very useful is connecting with them on the phone beforehand and going through all of it with them, walking them through it. Because obviously I can't do it on video conference because I want them to be comfortable with it first. And, you know, I asked them a lot of questions about their level of knowledge and do they have somebody there to help them, those kinds of things. And we'll also set up a session before our first meeting so that that's it, 15 minutes to try out the video conferencing software. Because you know and I know some of them, it's just never going to work for them. So I always see it as sort of advanced coaching just to prepare them so they feel like you're already helping them and they're not feeling anxious at the same time with the conferencing software as they are with connecting with you. Jan, did you have anything to add to that?
Could you tell? I love it. I thought interesting just to add to what Shona said, just before I was leaving to come here this morning to do this webinar, my husband got a phone call and he is involved in an online summit seminar. I think there are 3,500 people coming to this seminar this weekend. And just as I was leaving, he got that phone call that Shona was just talking about. And it was the lady on the other end. She was calling from Las Vegas or somewhere. And she said, you know, hi, is this Mr. So-and-so? And I wanted to make sure you're familiar with our plan and our program. Here's how you use these various functions. It was slick. She was on the phone for not very many minutes and he was impressed, and it was a great way to set the tone for the whole weekend. So I just want to add that.
Yeah, it's like you have another job now to help coach them through video conferencing software. And that's all, it's got to come first for sure.
Good, thank you. We have another question. Someone would like to know if you have any tips for bridging the language barriers when you're hosting workshops with link classes. So our link classes, that's the English as
language
second
instruction
language classes.
Yeah. Jan, you want to start?
Well, I think that, and I sort of alluded to it earlier, that there really is an awareness that has to happen. And it's no different than when we coach people in public speaking. We often have these crazy habits of how we speak. And one of the main habits that we have to help people get past is speed. And it really is important for people to slow down. And one of the strategies, which is extremely annoying that we use, and it drives people crazy when we do, and it works really well, is after every sentence that you speak, I would like you to pause for a count of 2. And if you are able to do that, not only will you be able to clarify your own thoughts, but you will be able to give people a second to digest what you're saying.
And also see how well Jan was enunciating her words. So just like when you're talking to people whose first language is not English in person, same thing on the screen, just really enunciate very clearly, slow it down. Now here's a quick little tip how to practice it. You all know your own name and you all know your own phone number and you're so used to saying it. Hi, my name's Shona Welsh. My phone number is 705-715-6106. We actually do, I know, we actually rush through these things. And particularly when I find working with new Canadians, your name is not necessarily going to be familiar to them as their name might not be familiar to you. So one of the things we've learned, particularly working a lot in the Middle East, is to say, hi, I'm Shona Welsh. And you heard it really clearly, and I have to just purposefully slow myself down because I know my name. My name is Shona Welsh. Like, come on. But people aren't hearing it, right? We have to develop an ear for these different names. I mean, the first year we went overseas, we are, you know, it's not Jane and Sarah and John and David in the class. It's Ashraf and Mohammed and
Abdulaziz,
I don't know, all of them,
Abdulrahman.
right? So we, Abdul Rahman is, yeah, Abdul Rahman. So, you know, we just spend a lot of time when we get a new group of students actually going for dinner that night and going through their names and just making sure that we can pronounce it clearly. But a really good way to practice is with your own name and your own phone number, and ask people around you, how fast does that sound to them? And when you can slow it down where people can actually hear your name clearly, you've probably slowed it down enough. So that's just a quick little tip on that.
That's great. And we have time for one more question. And someone's asking, do you have any tips on gaining trust with newcomer clients when meeting them for the first time virtually? And you did mention earlier eye contact, and that might not be possible or might come across as being too direct in some cultures.
Sure.
So what other sort of advice do you have?
Well, I always find, and in all the countries that I've lived and worked in, that people are never offended by your curiosity about their culture. So even if I know the answers to the questions, I will often get people talking. Like, for example, I mentioned I have some new Canadian students in a business class, and they're from various parts of Africa. They're all Francophone, so French is their first language, and they are required to speak in English. That's part of the goal of the program. So I asked them, you know, one person was from Djibouti. Now, I once wrote a paper in a program on Djibouti, but I didn't let him know that. So I started asking him questions. So tell me a little bit about Djibouti, and getting them to start talking about their country that, of course, in many cases, they had to make the tough decision to leave or were forced to leave. It gets them disarmed and they start feeling comfortable, and you start to see some of their personality. You know, some of the stories I hear when I ask people about their country and their culture are just amazing. And they'll often weave in personal things as well. So I use what I call the coach approach. Just start asking them questions about something that's important to them. And often their country, their culture is a really nice opener, and it gets them warmed up. Jan, did you want to add anything to that?
You'll notice that I push back again, and I like this simply because now, remember what we talked about earlier, now all of a sudden I'm a little more relaxed, this is a little more casual, and you can see more of my body language, and you can tell that I'm just kind of hanging out. So that's the first thing that I would do. And then just to add to what Shona said, I like to infuse conversation with my own stories too, right? So, and I did it. I referred to my husband at one point during the PowerPoint, and I talked about my son, and we laugh a little bit about what parenting style we have and those sorts of things. So just to provide a little bit of light on me as an actual human being, so that I'm not just
connection, right? It's really just all about connection.
Yeah, totally. And it's something that you do naturally, but you're all just concerned about it because you're thinking, oh my goodness, I've got this camera barrier between us. Well, just be you. Talk about the stories that you would normally talk about. Ask the questions you would normally talk about, and try and it's a shift, but try and see that camera as a friend. It really is helpful. But you know how to do this. You just have to relax about it a bit.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, Shona and Jan. And for those of you that still might have questions, you are welcome to email Jan and Shona directly, and you can reach them through their website at www.ovationspeakertraining.com. Or alternatively, you can email me directly, and I can pass on the questions to Jan and Shona for you.
Also, Natalie, on the handout, our email addresses are on the handout. Everyone's going to get to, so feel free anytime.
Perfect. So thank you again. This was a wonderful, very engaging presentation. Jan and Shona, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you to everyone joining as well out there as attendees. We really appreciate your participation today. We do have 2 more upcoming webinars. One on the 7th, and we do have another one in 2 weeks' time, but please look at our website for the most up-to-date schedule. And as I mentioned, today's presentation will be available on demand on our website within 48 hours. Following today's presentation, as soon as the presentation is complete, you'll be prompted to complete a survey, and we do welcome your feedback. And last but not least, thank you again, everybody, for attending today's presentation. We look forward to seeing you again in a future event. In the meantime, please stay well and stay safe, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks.